stronger ASEAN Social Work Consortium, recognizing its significant progress since its establishment more than a decade ago, we continuously evolve and expand, strengthening solidarity among our network of social work educators and practitioners and advocates of social welfare. The recently approved ASEAN Social Work Consortium Work Plan 2021 to 2025 reflects our collective and compelling aspirations for social work profession, as well as our clearer roles as social workers along poverty eradication, enhancing the capacities of the poor and vulnerable sectors, and contributions to attaining the Sustainable Development Goals, among others. The ASWC Work Plan 2021-2025 also complements the priority areas and is aligned to the strategic directions of the roadmap, ensuring collaborative and cooperative efforts along social work and social welfare, taking into consideration the lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the shifts in socioeconomic, political, and economic landscapes. Now more than ever, gaining the knowledge and wealth of experience these past years, let us stand united and stronger for the enhanced recognition of social work as a profession that can help achieve social development, social cohesion, and empowerment of peoples in ASEAN. Let us renew and further strengthen the ASEAN Social Work Consortium as an important venue and mechanism to discuss matters that affect social work and social welfare. Let us continue to build awareness among ASEAN member states and heighten cooperation and collaboration with other professions and disciplines in other sectors to ensure seamless, complementing, and more impactful delivery of social services and assistance to the people of ASEAN, both at the regional and national level. With that, I look forward to your active participation, substantive inputs, and sharing of your valuable insights, as well as accomplish the goals of today's activity. Take this opportunity to share your learnings and experiences as we explore the roles of social work, be champions of social protection and advancement of social welfare services, and how we can further contribute to responding collectively to the emerging concerns and challenges, empowering and strengthening the resiliences and capabilities of the vulnerable sectors. Let us take advantage of having the ASEAN Social Work Consortium and our expanding network and partnership to further advance cross-sectoral collaboration toward the achievement of our common goals. Once again, thank you and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Before we move on, thank you, Excellency. But before we move on, I would like to invite the distinguished opening speakers to turn on their cameras so we can take a group photo. Can we invite all speakers to turn their cameras on, please? Okay, we see that the speakers have turned their cameras on. We will now take this photo in 2 parts. So 3, 2, 1. And another one, please. 3, 2, 1. Sorry, just one last one. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. I'd like again to thank our distinguished speakers for opening the conference and helping us to set the scene and inspire us to transform the roadmap into action. Let us now view a second video about the critical role social workers can play, this time an example from Vietnam.
Thậm chí là trẻ nó không kết nối được với cha mẹ, không giữa cha mẹ với trẻ là bất đồng. Nhưng mà khi có mấy chị là tham gia vào thì lại hàn gắn lại được giữa cha mẹ, giữa trẻ với người thân, cái không có nói nhau được hoặc là không hiểu nhau đó thì mình làm cầu nối. Đó, rất là nhiều trường hợp mà phải nói chị cũng thấy nhiều trường hợp, phải nói là không trường hợp nào mình bỏ được hết, còn trường hợp nào mình cũng phải giúp trong khả năng cho phép mình. Đó là cái trường hợp thứ nhất ha. Còn trường hợp thứ hai á, thì mình cũng vừa qua mình thấy cũng là cái kết quả mang lại. Đó là cái trường hợp mà chính người thân của trẻ là cậu ruột là có những cái biểu hiện là bạo lực đối với cháu của mình. Nhưng mà khi mà chị biết được cái trường hợp đó thì chị sẽ nói chuyện rồi thêm và khai thác thêm thông tin từ đứa trẻ gái. Thì đứa trẻ gái nó chia sẻ thêm một vài vấn đề mình thấy rất là nhạy cảm. Đó, rồi vì trong cuộc sống hàng ngày với cậu ở trong gia đình thì mình thấy là nó không được an toàn. Do đó mình vừa tư vấn cho người cậu về cái pháp luật mà bảo vệ trẻ em, pháp luật mà có những hành vi không phù hợp đối với trẻ. Và hiện nay là đứa trẻ nó đang phát triển. Cái mục đích của mình để mà muốn trở thành nhân viên công tác xã hội á thì mình cũng chắc có lẽ là mình có cái tâm huyết đối với công tác trẻ em, mà đặc biệt là đối với những người yếu thế á. Do đó là chị thấy chớp lấy cơ hội này liền, xin liền là cũng như là mình sẽ chọn cái nghề này.
Có thể khẳng định rằng là để vận hành một hệ thống pháp luật, chính sách và đặc biệt là một hệ thống dịch vụ bảo vệ trẻ em thì không thể thiếu trách nhiệm và vai trò của các nhân viên công tác xã hội chuyên nghiệp.
An inspiring story, which truly shows the life-saving services that social workers provide. And with this, I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Chisana Han, Head of the Poverty Eradication and Gender Division of the ASEAN Secretariat, to share the objectives of the conference and to provide a quick overview of our agenda today. Dr. Chisana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Casey. Good morning, Excellency Ekapha Pantawong and Ms. Deborah Comey, Regional Director of the UNICEF East Asia, and Excellency Jocelyn. I am Chisana Han, the Head of the Poverty Eradication and Gender Division at the ASEAN Secretariat. I'm very delighted today to be with you, the distinguished guests and the colleagues from the ASEAN sectoral body, the Minister and the Association of the Social Work, the academic institution and the development partner, that we are working on the ASEAN roadmap for the implementation of the Hanoi Declaration on strengthening the social work for cohesive and responsive ASEAN community. I would like to introduce the objective of this ASEAN Regional Conference on the strengthening social work today. The conference will be in 3 days, and the objective of the conference will cover first to review the progress by the ASEAN member states for the implementation of the ASEAN Declaration and the roadmap on strengthening the social work. And we also will sensitize the responsible, the ministry, the agency, and the body on the pillar of the declaration and the roadmap, including the priority action and indicators. We will share the example of the good and promising practice from the region and globally on the strengthening social work and the wider social service workforce. Next slide, please. The conference also will identify the key actions for the regional collaboration to accelerate the action on the strengthening social work and the wider social service workforce. We will explore the role of social workers across the sector, including the social protection, health, education, justice, and disaster management, and the role of the social worker in delivering mental health support and services. The conference also will explore the role of the social workers in preventing and responding to violence against women and children, including those affected by the migration and the minimum package of service for the response. The conference, next slide please. The conference during these 3 days also will explore the effective public finance management for strengthening the social service workforce, will sharing the good and promising practice. Also, we will review draft of the key regional guidance envisaged under the ASEAN roadmap on ratio of the social workers per the population role of the social worker in key sector. For instance, in education, health, and disaster management, role of the social worker in the social protection system. And also, the conference will explore the key actions required to establish the mutual recognition arrangement for the social worker. Next slide, please. For the conference, there will be 3 days of the conference, and day 1 will be under the theme of the plan and progress on the implementation of the ASEAN roadmap for the implementation of the Hanoi Declaration on strengthening social work for cohesive and responsive ASEAN community. During the day 1, there will be the consultation on the draft of the ASEAN regional guidance on minimum ratios of the social workers per population, and also the consultation on the draft of the ASEAN guidance on the role of the social worker in allied sector. On the day 2, will be on the theme of the developing and supporting the workforce, which the section include the creating physical space for the social services workforce strengthening that will be shared by the local government of Cambodia. Another session in the day 2 will be the lesson from the pandemic, the critical role of the social service workforce, and the importance of the safeguarding their well-being. The session also include the role of the social worker in social protection, strengthening the case management, and essential services, especially for the vulnerable group. The consultation also will cover the sharing of the country example and the essential services for the survivor of the violence against children and violence against women. And also, the consultation will be under the issue of the draft regional e-learning course on the protecting children in the context of migration. On the last day of the day 3, there will be the theme of the developing and supporting the workforce. That will include the 2 main sessions that are strengthening the education at national and regional level, and the country consultation on the mutual recognition arrangement for the social work. So thank you very much. I would like to end my presentation on the objective here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chisana, for clearly presenting the objectives and the very exciting 3-day agenda. I'd now like to invite our friend and partner, Ms. Rachel Harvey, who is the Regional Advisor for Child Protection from the UNICEF East Asia and Pacific region, to lead an interactive session with our distinguished participants. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Casey, and a very good morning to all the participants. I'm really delighted to be joining you all for this regional conference on such a critical issue for children, for families, for vulnerable groups, on strengthening social work. So as Casey said, we're now going to move to our first interactive session of many of the conference. And we're going to kick off by focusing on perspectives and hopes for social work. And please note that throughout this conference, we're going to use this tool Slido, which some of you will be familiar with, but maybe for others, this is a new tool. So this beginning session will give you a chance to try it out. Of course, if you are having challenges with Slido, there is always the chat box. There is always the Q&A for Zoom. But if you do have a mobile phone, you're able to take a picture of the QR code or join at slido.com. So if you're on your computer, you can join at slido.com and put in the code hashtag SSWSOS. Then you'll be able to log on. So we're going to give you a little bit of time to log on. So either take a picture of the QR code. You will also see a link, slido.com, with the password hashtag SSWS-OS. And I think that there is a link now in the chat box. Yes, thank you to the organizers. They've put a link in. So if you would like to join now, you will be able to see the first question. So the first question is about social workers and our views and their value to communities. We heard from our speakers, we saw in the opening video voices from social workers across the region, and we just heard the inspiring story from the social worker in Vietnam. So the question for you is, what do social workers mean to you and the communities they serve? So what do social workers mean to you and the communities they serve? And if you could put one or two words, how would you describe them? We heard the word hero, we saw the value of them, they contribute to society, the SDGs. So what do social workers mean to you? And what do they mean to the communities that they serve? And I see that we already have some contributions from the audience. Thank you so much for that. We have more people joining, so please do log on to Slido. We're going to have another question after this, and we're going to be using Slido throughout the day, so it'd be great if you can log onto it. So we're seeing catalyst for change, hero, we're seeing tireless workers, and we really saw that through COVID-19. We see the social work army, indeed, really at the front line of providing that support. We see that they are a bridge to resources, a friend, a pillar of the community, an agent of change. We also see words such as safety, welfare, refuge for help, servant and catalysts, a connection, human rights defenders as well. Absolutely on the front line of defending human rights of the communities that they serve, helper, and we see a lot of words around hero and work with hearts. And I think we heard that also from the Philippine social worker, that this is a work that's coming from their heart as well, that they mobilize, that they connect with resources and coordination. We see the word power there as well as public supporters. And we see support as a real central part there for the front line. So that's really fantastic. Thank you all for those really inspiring words. And we're going to capture that. It's going to be part of our reports to show the real value that social workers have for all of us, for the communities, for children, families, and others. So let's go to the next question. And this next question will be open throughout the rest of the session. So you'll see the next question, and this is about what you hope that the conference will achieve for social work in ASEAN. So we see the enormous value that social workers play. We saw the contribution you think that they make to the communities. So now thinking about this conference over the next 3 days, and we heard what the next 3 days have in store for all of us. So what do you hope that conference will achieve? Of course, we have an opportunity to share good practice, promising practice, also some of the challenges that we're facing in strengthening social work. But then following that conference, what are we going to achieve? So we see some contributions here, understanding, commitment from member states to increase resources, because we know that social workers are under-resourced as well. We see increased commitment from governments as well as action to create more social work posts. We know that there are not enough social work posts. We also see the desire for professionalization of social work and greater recognition of social work and the professional role that they play. We also see innovations and good practice serves, as well as sharing social work practice and a sense of unity across all of the ASEAN countries and unity for others. And I see here being together as one big team, indeed, because we are one big team working towards social work across the region as well. We see also to build a common understanding and especially a common guide, and to find more ways to protect women and children in the community, as well as to increase the appreciation that we have. So here's some of the feedback. We're going to keep this open as the session progresses, and then we're going to come back to summarize what you've put in. So I'm going to go back to Casey now. Thank you so much for your participation. Over to you, Casey.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and for engaging participants around the critical role that social workers play in our communities. It really helps to set the stage for an inspiring and exciting conference. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Hugh Salmon, who joins us to share the building blocks required for a strong social service workforce. Mr. Salmon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the governments of Vietnam and the Philippines and ASEAN and SOMSWOD and all the social workers out there for making this conference happen. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to come together to support the workforce in its growth across this region. So in this presentation, we're just going to talk about, first of all, what is the workforce? We'll have a chance to look at that in more detail as well later. Framing the strengthening of the workforce, what's the framework that UNICEF has developed together with partners for that? And we'll be looking at some key considerations for workforce strengthening. Next slide, please. So first of all, to define the social service workforce, of course, at the core of the social service workforce is professional social work, but there are also a broad range of professionals and paraprofessionals who are involved in various different roles. Some of them have a university degree and a licensed qualification. Some of them have just specific training, and they're the ones that we call paraprofessionals. What do they do? Well, they work at multiple levels. Overall, they're promoting social justice and human rights, and they're challenging and reducing discrimination in all its forms. They're providing and or facilitating access to services. They're preventing and responding to violence, abuse, exploitation, neglect, and family separation. And in terms of the way that they do that, well, they're engaging people in so many different ways. And I think we saw that in the comments earlier as to what the key role that they play. And they play it in so many different ways, engaging people, structures, and organizations, and working with children, youth, adults, families, and communities. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is the framework for strengthening the social service workforce that's been developed by UNICEF. And this is just to show you what it looks like, and you can find it online if you Google that particular document, which I hope you all will. If we move to the next slide, we'll go into a little bit more detail into some of the elements of this particular framework. But you can see it, first of all, at the top, that this includes the promotive work, preventive work, and responsive services. So those are the different ways that social workers work that I just mentioned. They are promoting in terms of raising the profile of the workforce, advocacy for what we do, preventing problems before they occur, and preventing problems getting worse. And they're also providing response services in terms of responding when there are critical issues and needs. And so those are the ways that they work. So what do we need to do then to involved in the workforce? In what roles? What functions? And as we'll be looking at later at this conference, what kind of ratio, approximately what number of social service workers do we need per population, per unit of population? That helps us with planning. It also involves costing and financing for social service work, which is incredibly important and often under-recognized when people think that this is just a voluntary activity. Or maybe they recognize it's professional, but they just cost for the salaries. We have to look at the whole resource base of social service work, which is often severely under-resourced. We need to look at the regulatory framework, and that particularly will underpin the quality education, accreditation of that education and training, and then licensing professionals when they come out of those training courses and degrees, so that we know they are recognized professionals who meet the required standards. And of course, there needs to be overall human resource policies and then standards not only for individual practice, but for whole organizations. Next slide, please. In terms of developing the workforce, again, there are a number of different points involved in this pillar. As you can see, there are 3 major pillars of strengthening that I'm talking about here. So under developing the workforce, it's really about multi-sector collaboration is the first priority, because it's not about individual universities or training institutes doing their work on their own. They really have to come together around a shared vision for a curriculum, meeting joint standards. So it's aligned education, training in line with national priorities and standards, which have to be set by the national government and stakeholders. It's important also, and vitally important in fact, to integrate into social work education the field work, which is when social workers have real practice experiences. And above all, not only that they go out to the field and they are supervised in their practice, but they apply learning and they apply theory in practice with the support of their workplace supervisor and their tutor, working closely together. And unfortunately, we've seen that in many cases, that is somewhat absent. Also, an important pillar of developing the workforce is indigenous knowledge, because social work cannot be imported from abroad. Although it has developed in a number of different countries, in each country it has to be rooted in indigenous knowledge, culture, and values, and indigenous knowledge on how to help people overcome difficulties in their lives. And so that needs to be built into the education and training. And of course, there is a need for ongoing and continuous opportunities for professional development, because we all know from our own jobs that we didn't learn everything that we needed to know before we started the job, and then we could remember it for the next 10 or 20 years of our career without ever having another training opportunity. Of course not. We all need to be refreshed. And this is particularly important for social service workers because they're working with very vulnerable groups and they need to have new knowledge and new approaches all the time. Otherwise, they will not be able to meet the required professional standards, however good their initial training was. Next slide, please. And supporting the workforce. This is where we all need to come together. All of the governments and international organizations represented here today, all the national organizations and all the civil society organizations need to come together to support the workforce. We need to campaign to get more people into the workforce. So we need to improve recruitment and retention. We need to support the professional associations of social workers and others in the workforce who represent social workers, but also can maintain high standards and advocate for those standards, and also the regulatory bodies, including national councils of social work. Fundamentally important, you remember I really emphasized about that practice placement or the field component of becoming a social worker. Once you're a social worker, as well as that ongoing training, quality supervision is vital. And that has to be in-depth, supportive, reflective, preferably one-to-one with a qualified, experienced supervisor who themselves knows what social work is all about. But it might also be in a team. And so supervision is so much more than management. It's really about trying to enhance practice, to improve the standards of services, and to help the individual workers develop in their practice, feeling supported and being able to reflect on their most difficult cases. So we really need to have systems of quality supervision for every worker. We need to promote career development and progression. That's the thing that I put into that word cloud earlier on, because I go to so many countries where I see people joining the workforce and then leaving after 1 year or 2 years. And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy when a child in foster care or in a children's home has to put up with 5 or 6 different social workers, because each young, enthusiastic social worker that they have leaves after a pitifully short time. Or because there is pressure from parents, from teachers, from peers saying, it's not a good job, don't stay in that job, find another job, find a job that pays better. We really have to make sure the salary and conditions are good enough and the promotion prospects and the career prospects are all good enough that people say, yeah, social work, that's my career, that's my future, and that's where I'm going to go, and I'm going to go far. And we need to have that in the workforce. And the other members of the social service workforce too, who are in different roles, including community volunteers and paraprofessionals, they all need to feel included and motivated too. Thank you. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. Wow, we got to the end quicker than I expected. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hugh Salmon from the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. Thank you for sharing with us the key components required for planning, developing, and supporting the social service workforce. As we continue to highlight what we need to do to strengthen the social service workforce in ASEAN member states, in line with the roadmap, let me now turn to Dr. Natia Parshkalats. Dr. Natia is an associate professor with the Javakishvili Tbilisi State University in Georgia, and she's also a senior technical advisor with the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. She will share with us a snapshot of the current status of the social service workforce in the region. Dr. Natia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone from the country of Georgia. I'm very excited to be part of this conference, especially because I had an opportunity to be attending the conference in 2019 in Vietnam, which built a strong foundation for the developments that we're discussing in this conference during this next 3 days. Next slide, please. This morning, I'm tasked to share with you a snapshot of social service workforce strengthening in ASEAN, which is based on a summary of findings of the regional multi-country mapping, which was conducted in 2019. Next slide, please. Many of you were probably part of the mapping process and do remember the findings of the multi-country review, which was published in 2019 and is widely available on the web. So if you don't have a copy, please download and use it for your reference. Just a reminder that the mapping report provides an overview of the context of the social service workforce planning, development, and support. It identifies recommendations for workforce strengthening as well as for the delivery of countries' social welfare systems. It's important to note that even though the document focuses on child protection, it is fully applicable to social service workforce strengthening as a whole. Next one, please. The report covers 15 countries in East Asia and Pacific region, and out of this 15, five ASEAN countries, namely Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, were covered through in-depth analysis and mapping of the workforce, whilst 3 additional ASEAN countries, Laos, Malaysia, and Myanmar, were covered through desk review. Next slide, please. Some of the information collected through the workforce mapping was about planning, developing, and support of the social service workforce, and related to the policies and regulations on social service workforce. Also looked at the numbers of the social service workforce representatives per child population in each of the covered countries. It included information on the qualifications, distribution, vacancy rates of the social service workforce representatives. Under the development and training, we looked very closely at the availability of different levels of education, training, field placement, and practice learning available for the social service workforce representatives. We've looked at the size, presence, and effectiveness of the professional associations and their role in strengthening of the social service workforce, as well as availability of professional supervision, and very importantly, at the workers' perceptions of challenges and opportunities with the professional supervision and career development that they are experiencing in their countries. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see a framework for strengthening the social service workforce that I'm sure all of you are very well familiar with. I should note that the report, as well as the Hanoi Declaration and the roadmap, fully consider this framework for strengthening the workforce. And also these 2 documents, the declaration and the roadmap, build on the findings of the mapping report from 2019. So we're happy that the countries and the region found a very good use of the findings of the mapping report. Next slide, please. On next few slides, next one please, I will be presenting to you some of the key indicators, next slide please, from the 2019 mapping report. And also on the same slides in green, I've included some updated data on some of the same indicators. Please consider this data as draft, and they are coming from UNICEF annual reporting. Even though some of these findings will still have to be verified by the country governments, we believe that it's a very useful comparison to see what was the progress in the countries during the last 3 years. So as you can see from the selected planning indicators that have been included on this slide, in 2019, all countries covered through the in-depth report, meaning Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, reported some level of availability of normative framework, which outlines or defines the functions of the social service workforce and provides any practice standards relevant to this workforce. So even though we can see that some countries had laws and regulations on the social service workforce, not everyone had those, and even the countries possessing those regulations admitted the need for strengthening this legal framework, which we believe that is a very important component in this foundation for strengthening the workforce in general. We also had some evidence on the availability of national strategic plans on strengthening the social service workforce. And we can see that during the last 3 years, some countries achieved good progress in strengthening similar legislative framework. And now we have Indonesia and Vietnam reporting having strategic plans in these areas. Also, it was very interesting to understand the situation with licensing and regulation of the social service workforce. Back in 2019, Philippines and Thailand were 2 countries out of 5 which had a professional regulation system. And now we are really excited to see that some additional countries have introduced and strengthened their professional regulation system. Indonesia has a full-fledged registration system, while Cambodia is also in the process of developing this system. Again, please treat data shown in green as draft data, but I think it's very useful to see the difference and the progress that the countries have so far. Despite these achievements and good developments on the planning indicators, overall, as it was also mentioned by some other presenters this morning, it is obvious that countries need to strengthen their efforts on developing the normative framework, which is very important for strengthening the social service overall. Next slide, please. On the next slide, I have shown the size of the social service workforce as it was reported in the 2019 report. We also have some data available from these countries in 2029. In 2021, we'll have it in 29 as well. However, I haven't included those findings here because it was very obvious that the countries are not using the standardized definition of the social service workforce. And hence the data we had in 2019 and we have it in 2021 are not very well comparable with each other. I have to note that the findings from Thailand were quite consistent because Thailand was looking at the number of social service workforce representatives, namely registered social workers. And here we could see some significant increase in the number of registered social workers from 3,000 to 4,500 in Thailand. While in others, as it was mentioned, it is very important to make sure that we are consistently looking at the same group of workforce representatives to be able to better compare and assess our progress in this direction. Overall, we have to admit that the number of the workforce available in the countries is not always adequate and is not always enough to meet all the needs of our population at all levels. Next one, please. Here I presented some developing indicators, and we were very happy to see that all countries assessed in 2019 reported having academic programs for social workers, even though these programs had different titles and many of them had rather different and not standardized content for social work training. We believe that it's a very strong foundation and good start for developing this work workforce. Of course, it is important to make sure that the academic curricula is standardized and is in line with international requirements, and that all the schools and programs have strongly developed professional development or professional training component. However, having the academic programs as well as diploma and certificate programs in all countries covered by this report, we believe is a very good foundation and a resource for ensuring that we are able to strengthen our professional workforce, but also ensure capacity development of our paraprofessional and volunteer workforce engaged in different tasks. Next slide, please. Next slide talks about supporting indicators, which report on the existence of the professional associations in the countries covered by the report. Later during this conference, we will talk more about the importance of the professional associations and the role that they can play in strengthening of the social service workforce in the countries. It's important to see that all countries shown on the slide had one or several social work associations. We see a progress in these countries in the sense that countries are making efforts to strengthen their professional associations, but also it's important to understand that not all countries in the region have been able to establish professional associations or identify their roles at the legislative level. So we urge the countries to make sure that they have this, they develop this very vital component for their own social service workforce strengthening and support. We've also looked at the availability of publicly available code of ethics, and here it's important to understand that we have some good progress in the countries shown on the slide. However, more work is needed in order for all the professionals and paraprofessional social service workforce to have a very deep understanding of the code of ethics and be able to apply it in their everyday practice. Also, we have findings here on the existence of a system of professional supervision, and this is one of the components of professional support that we will be discussing in more details during the conference. The findings show that even though the professional supervision exists and is developing in most of the countries, there are more efforts necessary in order for our social service workforce representatives to have strong support and encouragement, also capacity development for their professional supervisors. Next slide, please. On this last slide, we've included data, some additional data on the roadmap indicators. Just a reminder and ask to all of you to treat this information as draft to be verified by the countries. Here we see some very important indicators on human resource information systems, information management systems specifically for case management, also information on the government-led national leadership groups, also availability of workforce service costing or budgetary tools available in the country. And as you can see, the countries have some significant progress in all of these areas, but also it is very obvious that more work is needed in order for the countries to be able to make sure that they have well-supported, well-developed, and fully strengthened social service workforce, which is able to support people of the ASEAN in their development and in ensuring their social welfare and social support. These indicators serve as a very good foundation for measuring progress towards the roadmap indicators and roadmap implementation. However, also we need to understand that countries will need to make strong efforts to strengthen their human resource information systems in order for our progress to be better measurable and in order for all of us to understand better what needs to be done for strengthening our own workforce in each of the countries. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Natia. It was particularly interesting to see the progress of social service workforce strengthening in ASEAN member states. Once again, we also encourage participants to share any comments, feedback, or questions you may have in the chat box, and our speakers will do their best to respond to you. And now, as we've been provided with a snapshot of the current state of the social service workforce in ASEAN, again, thank you. Let's hear voices from the frontline workers themselves. I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Melba Manapol, ex officio president of the National Association for Social Work Education in the Philippines, and the current chairperson of the Social Work Department at Ateneo de Davao University, who will share findings from a survey of social workers. Dr. Melba, please.
Thank you very much. Representatives from the ASEAN member states, distinguished guests, colleagues in the social work profession, a pleasant good morning. I am grateful for this opportunity to share to you the findings of the ASEAN Social Work Survey, highlighting the key actions needed to support the social workers. Next slide, please. The survey, which was conducted early in 2021, was responded to by 5,556 respondents coming from 9 ASEAN countries. Indonesia and the Philippines are the top responders for this survey. Next slide, please. Majority of those who responded are social workers working with the government. Quite a number of respondents are paraprofessionals and non-government organization workers. Next, please. Social workers are confronted with various challenges in performing their roles. First and foremost is the concerns about safety. Most social workers are considered frontline workers, especially during the time of the pandemic. This is because when most professionals stayed at home, social workers face the risk of COVID-19 to be able to deliver social services to the people. The lack of training and professional knowledge is also considered a challenge. Despite existence of established schools of social work in most of the ASEAN member states, this concern was still reiterated. The need for capacity enhancement, especially when beginning social workers join the practice setting, is found wanting. One important consideration for effective performance of social workers is to strike a balance between the worker's competency, capacity, and the number of caseloads one would be able to handle. Sometimes, because of limited resources for work, social welfare organizations and agencies tend to increase the number of caseloads assigned to the worker. Too high caseloads often results to inefficient and ineffective delivery of social services. Lack of career advancement is also considered a challenge by social workers and social service workforce in the ASEAN. The need for qualifications framework and career progression is a work on for most ASEAN countries. Next slide, please. Shown on screen are the identified priorities to support social workers. 1. Social workers and social service workers call for lower caseloads and increased number of social workers. This may entail additional budget allocation for social welfare organizations, both at the national and the local levels, as well as those in the non-government organizations. The need to also improve promotion and advocacy of the social profession is seen as crucial in order to increase number of social workers. Closely related to increasing the number of social workers is the need to increase salary. Entry-level salary for government social worker in the ASEAN is quite low compared with other allied and helping professions. Another important priority for social workers in the ASEAN is to improve training opportunities. This may be done by setting up a national training institute per country to ensure availability and access to training programs. The newly established ASEAN Training Center for Social Work, spearheaded by Thailand, is an important milestone at the regional level in terms of this priority area. Then we have improved safety at work, should be an important priority in terms of advocacy. A policy to ensure safety at work can be lobbied with legislators by the ASEAN Social Work Consortium of its ASEAN member states. Given the pandemic and the challenges brought by the pandemic, the need to improve access to mental health, well-being support is also deemed necessary. Next slide, please. Social workers recognize the importance of strengthening quality and availability of education and training at the national level. The need to strengthen skills of staff is crucial as they play an important role in preparing students for effective practice once they graduate in college. It is high time that teaching staff be introduced to competency-based standards and training. ASEAN member states are encouraged to develop national standards for social work education. This is being worked out by majority of the member states. In the Philippines, the Commission for Higher Education, our CHED, ensures that schools of social work comply with national policies, guidelines, and standards for social work education. These guidelines emphasized on competency and outcome-based social work education. It also expanded field-based placements and field instruction education. ASEAN member states are also challenged to ensure continuing professional education. This can be done by providing in-service trainings at work, providing training opportunities and support for social workers to pursue higher education. Defining qualifications framework and career progression may help each country in ensuring continuing education. Next slide, please. Some recommendations from social workers to ASEAN or the ASEAN Social Work Consortium. First is to provide low-cost social training courses, develop regional guidance on the role of social workers in key sectors, health, education, justice, disaster risk management, and social protection. Third, maintain a resource hub for social work tools, training, and research. Fourth, organize regional conferences on social work. Fifth, set minimum standards for social work education. Then you have 6, professionalize the workforce, including regional accreditation of local certification. And lastly, promote positive perception of social workers and social work. Next slide, please. Some implications and scenarios for the social workers and social service workforce. Due to the pandemic, we have shifted to the usual face-to-face transactions with clients to remote online platforms. Looking ahead, there will be increased use of online platforms and technology in service provision, case management and conferencing, supervision and training. Second, the future role of social service workers would now include strengthening social protection, linking with social services, addressing workers' needs, including well-being, work conditions, pay, and advocacy for the social service workforce in future pandemics or similar humanitarian situations. And finally, the future workforce needs would now include training, capacity building, coordination, and greater recognition and support among leaders. I would like to underscore here the important role of the ASEAN Social Work Consortium in ensuring that these needs are addressed. Next, please. I think that ends my presentation. Thank you and good morning once again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melba, for sharing with us the voices of those for whom the roadmap is for, the frontline social service workers. Thank you. We would like to now give the floor to Dr. Hati Min Duc from Vietnam. Madam Duc is the Deputy Director General of the International Cooperation Department with the Ministry of Labor, Invalids, and Social Affairs of Vietnam. She also serves as Vietnam's representative on children's rights to the ACWC. Of course, we know her as the champion for strengthening social work in ASEAN. Madam Duc, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Casey.
Apologies, Madam Duc, your audio is a bit distant.
Is that okay now, Casey?
It's still a bit distant, ma'am. Is it possible to increase the volume just a little bit more, ma'am?
Is that okay now?
It's better, ma'am, but there's a slight echo.
Is that okay now? Yeah, I hope it's.
Yes, this is much better.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, I just want to share with you some way forward to strengthening the social work in ASEAN. We will have some presentation on the overview of ASEAN declaration on the and the roadmap action on implementation, strengthening the social work service, and some snapshot progress to date to implement the roadmap. Can you next slide, please? Yeah, thank you very much. And we know that for the ASEAN declaration on the strengthening the social work toward the cohesive and responsive ASEAN community, that was adopted in 2020. That was a political commitment at the highest level that contribute also to the promotion and capacity building of the social work, ensuring social protection and social services for disadvantaged groups, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, under the 11 pillars. But we know that that can also serve a very important document for the post-pandemic recovery. Next slide, please. And for this one, we would like to present to you some of the progress toward the adoption of this Hanoi Declaration, where we organize a lot of the meetings, working group meetings, and even ad reference consultation of the declaration. And the first one was a kickoff meeting back in 2019, where we see that many of our speakers previously have mentioned that attended by a person in that meeting too. And we have come up, next slide, with so many of the consultation one. And finally, the Hanoi Declaration on Social Work toward the cohesive, responsive ASEAN community was adopted with that emphasize the contribution of social work force in the achieving the SDG in different areas, and emphasize the catalytic roles of social work in enhancing the capacity and equitable access for vulnerable groups. And that also recognize a comprehensive approach to social work, service workforce strengthening in order to effectively and comprehensively strengthen the social work. Recognize the roles of ASEAN Social Work Consortium that we have Philippines USEC as like a coordinator for this one in this meeting, and for 2021 2021 to 2023. And the declaration also recognize the roles of ASEAN Training Center for Social Work and Social Welfare. Next slide, please. Where we also have this is after the adoption of the declaration, we organized several meetings again to develop the roadmap to implement the Hanoi Declaration, because you know that for the declaration we have a strategic direction for the development of the social work, but we need to have a concrete action, and that's why the roadmap was needed in order to identify different actions in order to respond and implement, realize the commitment of the ASEAN leaders into the concrete action by sector body. And the roadmap was started with the kick-off meeting, a discussion in March 2021 in Hanoi, Vietnam. Of course, we need to use a hybrid meeting since 2020 until now. And next will be the first, second, and the third online meeting of the technical working group to develop the roadmap that was started from April until July 2021. Next slide. We have so many of our familiar faces and friends, colleagues attending with our international organization with the support of the UNICEF and others. Next slide. And we also come up with the members we see here. So many of the technical sectoral body, including the senior official meeting on social welfare and development, and the ASEAN Social Work Consortium members, the training center, the chair and vice chair of sectoral body like health, education, justice, and also others like the rights of women and children, of course with the support of UNICEF, and also the administrative support by the ASEAN Secretariat. Next slide. And we also see that after several meetings and consultation, the roadmap was noted at the 38th and 39th ASEAN Summit. That was, next slide. We see so many of the steps in ASEAN for the ASEAN documents and declaration. Next, please. Yeah, the roadmap also show come up with the 7 priority areas. The first is establishing and strengthening the legal and policy framework for social work. Second is expanding and strengthening education and regulations on social work. And the third one is National Council and Association of Social Workers. The fourth is increasing professional recognition, development, and support. Like we know that all ASEAN member states is now selecting this process. Then we also talk about the enhancing national, regional, and international cooperation. The 6 areas is increasing resource allocation to the social welfare system, where we later on talk about the planning of the social work service and also the financing for this in this workshop meetings. And also the last one is develop strategy to enhance positive public perception of social work. Next slide. So with all of this, we have come up with so many of the issues related to the roadmap. The framework for that is for 10 years up to 2030, with the key activity prioritized for the first 5 years of implementation. We also developed the baseline indicators like a monitoring framework and midterm review in year 5. It means in 2025, we will do the midterm review of the roadmap to see what are the achievements, what are the challenges, and what need to do more in the future after 5 years implementation of this roadmap. And the key action will be identified later on for that. And the third one, we also promote the priority national action points and timeline per pillar for the next 5 years that can be provided by the ASWC Social Work Consortium for commitment, the national commitment in response to the implementation of this roadmap and the declaration. Next slide. And then we know that for the later, after the adoption by our AMSWAT minister, the Minister on Social Welfare and Development, we and also the notation by the ASEAN Summit, we continue to conduct the activities on the roadmap, socialization of the roadmap at the 10th ASEAN Social Work Consortium Conference, and that we call a regional retreat in commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the ASEAN Social Work Consortium Conference. And with the theme on social worker at the heart of the COVID-19 recovery, we talk a lot about the roles of social work in the post-COVID-19 and even the post-COVID-19 one, the challenges that we may need to may face in the future, and then what kind of the good practice that as countries and also the sector could do in order to accelerate the importance and also the roles of social workers during the COVID-19 and after the post one. This also socialization activity also supported with the by UNICEF. Next slide. And we would like also to update with you that some of the progress to implement the roadmap up to now. So the first one is that during the serial consultation, we have tried to finalization of the ASEAN Social Work Consortium work plan up to 2025 that has been endorsed by the Social Welfare and Development Senior Official Meeting and the Social Work Consortium. The work plan is fully aligned with the priorities of the roadmap. And we also try to functional to enhance the functional operation of the ASEAN Social Work the Training Center on Social and Social Welfare under the leadership of Thailand, and completion of the training need assessment amongst social workers in ASEAN member states. And we think that that also circulated to all the ASEAN member states, the focal point in order to get the needs of the different training center and also academies in order to promote the development of training in the on social worker in the future. And we also conducted the 9th publication of the ASEAN Social Work Journal in 2021 under the leadership of Social Work Indonesia. And ASWC is working for the ASWC Social Work Journal to open the Social Work Journal online media to obtain its accreditation as an international journal. And we also conduct the inaugural ASWC regional celebration of the ASEAN Social Work Day in 2021 in March, and the Social Work Day under the leadership of Thailand through Training Center on Social Work and Social Somswat of Thailand. And we also continue the public campaign on better perception of social worker, regional and at the national level, where we consider the social worker as the heroes of the society. Next slide. And with all of that, we try to also see about the development of key regional guidance on social work in ASEAN. And this is something that we are discussing in this event, in this 2.5 days event, where we talk about the regional guidance on the development and use of social work, social service workforce to populations ratio. This is under leadership of Vietnam. And we also try to discuss a little bit more on regional guidance on social work, service workforce strengthening for key sectors for strengthening the multi-sectoral delivery of social services in ASEAN member states under the leadership of Philippines in health, mental health and justice sectors, and under the leadership of Cambodia and Vietnam in education sector. And we also working toward the regional guidance on the role of social worker and social service workforce for strengthening social protection under the leadership of Cambodia. That is expected to be noted at the 30, 40 and 41 ASEAN Summit in November 2022. Next slide. So with all of this, we would like to, next slide please, to also see with the support of different of the ASEAN UNICEF Joint Work Program for up to 2025, which included the priority initiative under the roadmap, ensuring support to implement key activities in the roadmap, as we also see that UNICEF, Rachel, and other teams also, and also even Vietnam UNICEF office also supported a lot this progress. And we think it's very important that we want to have a more and the mobilization of more support from other international organizations and development partners in this process. And also we are trying to work with ASEAN member states to see if we could have some more allocations for the social work in the future. We also work with the ongoing key national initiative on strengthening social work based on the progress of the professionalization of social work in the respective member state. And we hope that from the regional perspective, from the regional action that we are working toward now, as I mentioned, and even during this meetings, we could see that there's a lot that ASEAN member states can benefit and also apply at national levels. And we also see some initial exploration on the development of ASEAN regional framework on mutual recognition arrangement for social work services, as we know that the needs for professional social workers in ASEAN is increasing with the aging society, with so many of the issues on the pandemics, on the disease, on the issues of the climate change that need more professional and more social worker that can move freely among ASEAN member states to support each other and even to be as the very important social work service workforce in the future. So we hope that by professionalization of the social worker in ASEAN member states with the concrete action at the regional level, we can promote this kind of mutual recognition arrangement. Not in one night, but maybe taking several years, but we will work toward this one. So ladies and gentlemen, I think that's all that we want to share. Next slide. at this moment, and we hope that all of the information can provide you with the updated information, so that can also lead to the discussion in the several action session later. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Duc, for a very comprehensive overview of the Hanoi Declaration and its accompanying roadmap. Before we conclude the opening session, we'd like to get back to Ms. Rachel Harvey to reflect on the answers provided by the participants to the question earlier in the session. What do you hope that the conference will achieve for social work? Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you to all of the participants that shared their views, shared their perspectives. So 10 big themes have come out from the Slido. The first one is that participants want to see the conference set a common vision, goal and framework for strengthening social work across the region, setting a clear direction for action and a guide for ASEAN member states. Second, participants want to establish a common understanding of social work and social work standards, and also standardize the social work profession and practice across the region. Participants also want to see strengthened commitment of governments and member states to invest in social work and social workers, and to ensure that social work are essential services. Next, participants want to see an increased appreciation and increased recognition of social workers by the public, by communities, and by governments, including to move towards professionalization and to have social work have equal importance to other professions. Participants also want to see increased capacities of social workers, the tools and the competencies they have, and for support to be given to social workers for their continuing professional development, but also to ensure their well-being and their welfare. Participants want to see increased resource allocation for social workers, and that social workers are empowered. And for this conference, they would like it to be a platform for connection, for networking, for an exchange of knowledge on best practice. And for the longer term, participants want this to strengthen the network between ASEAN nations on social works, between ASEAN social sectoral bodies, and to create a community of practice across the region, to be one big team. And lastly, participants want to be inspired to do more for the social service workforce. So thank you everyone for your contributions. Back to Casey.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for sharing your perspectives on and hopes for the social work and wider profession. We'd like to now conclude this opening session. I'm confident that we've started the conference off on the right foot. First, we have heard from senior officials in the region who have restated their commitment to lead and support work and partnership to make sure we turn words from the declaration and roadmap into action at the country level for strengthening the workforce. They have highlighted the criticality of the workforce in supporting vulnerable children, families, and communities, and helping us achieve the ASEAN and global development goals that we have set for ourselves. We've also heard from the experts on what actions we need to take in line with the ASEAN roadmap and international standards. We've also heard the voices from the front line and what they see as the key bottlenecks, opportunities, and actions required to strengthen and empower the workforce. And finally, we've heard from you, the participants in this conference, on your hopes for social work in ASEAN. Having set the scene and highlighting the criticality of the social service workforce in supporting vulnerable communities and achieving social cohesion in ASEAN, I'm confident that with these inputs, we're now ready to dive in to explore how we can translate the words in the declaration and roadmap into action over the next 3 days. But first, let's take a well-deserved 15-minute coffee break before we meet again in the next plenary, session 1 on planning social work and the workforce. The link for the next plenary, session 1, will be shared in the chat box. So session 1 will not be in this meeting link. The new link for session 1 will be shared in the chat box. We will now take a 15-minute coffee break and come back at 10:30 a.m. Jakarta time for session 1. So that's 10:30 a.m. session 1 on planning social work and the workforce, with the meeting link in the chat box. Thank you very much again.